I saw the boss kiss my wife during the company dinner, so I went up to them and said, "What nonsense is going on here? Now everyone will know who you really are. I'm going to get a divorce and your mask will fall." The restaurant, previously full of conversations and muffled laughter, fell into a sepulchral silence. All eyes were on us, but none of them were more intense than mine. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, a mixture of hatred and humiliation that consumed me from the inside out. The lump in my throat grew, the muscles in my jaw clenched, and I felt my hands shaking with fury, as if my own body refused to accept what was before my eyes. She looked at me as if she didn't know what to say. Pale, her lips still moist from the kiss she had exchanged with him, her eyes wide, desperately searching for a way out of the catastrophe that had just exploded right in the middle of that room. The boss, on the other hand, wiped his mouth with his napkin, as if trying to erase the evidence of betrayal, but it was too late. The silence in the room weighed like lead, the guests pretended to look away, but their ears were attentive to every syllable. The whispered conversations spread like wildfire, spreading among those present, making the scandal impossible to ignore. "It's not what it seems," she murmured, but her voice came out weak, void of any credibility. I laughed. I laughed because that phrase was so cliché, so banal, so miserably pathetic to justify what had happened that it made me want to vomit. The betrayal was there, wide open, in front of everyone, and yet, she tried to find words that would ease the weight of it, as if the guilt could evaporate into thin air. "Isn't it what it seems?" My voice was full of irony, and I felt my chest burn. "So tell me, what exactly does it look like?" Because, from my angle, it looked a lot like my wife exchanging spit with my boss in the middle of a company dinner. "Do you have a better explanation for that?" The boss tried to intervene, as if he had any morals to say anything at that moment. "Look, man, let's talk. You're acting impulsively." His audacity made me laugh bitterly. "Impulsively?" My voice boomed, reverberating throughout the room. "It was impulsive for you to put your tongue in my wife's mouth thinking no one would see." She grabbed my arm, but I pulled away, as if her touch burned my skin. Her scent, which once comforted me, now disgusted me. Betrayal wasn't just the act. It was everything. It was the look exchanged between them when they thought no one was seeing. It was the complicit laughter, the familiarity, the freedom with which they touched each other as if it were a habit, as if I didn't exist. It wasn't just a kiss. It was proof of something much bigger, much deeper, something that ripped me away from reality and pushed me into an abyss of pain. The humiliation was overwhelming. There I was, a man who built a life alongside her, who sacrificed so many nights, so many dreams, to guarantee a future for both of us. And all that was left was this, a stolen kiss under the yellow light of an expensive restaurant, under the eyes of dozens of witnesses. Betrayal wasn't just a wound in my soul. It was a spectacle. A live show, where I was the protagonist of the ridiculous. "Please, let's talk later, at home," she insisted, her voice shaking, her eyes glistening with the beginnings of tears that I didn't know if they were of regret or just despair at being caught. "At home?" I spat out the words. "Do you really think I'm going to go home with you after this?" The boss, still trying to save his own skin, stood up. "I didn't want it to happen like this." "Like this?" My laugh was cold, empty. "You mean there was a right way for it to happen?" He didn't respond. Neither of them responded. The truth was that there was no answer capable of fixing what had been broken. Trust, respect, love. All of that had turned to ashes the moment her lips touched his. The moment she allowed him to be part of something that should have been ours alone. The waiter hesitantly approached. "Sir, perhaps it would be best for you to go somewhere more private." I looked around, and the curious faces, some containing sneers, others displaying pure bewilderment, made me realize that there was nothing more to say there. The shame had already spread like poison, and I wasn't going to stay there to entertain the audience even more. I looked at her one last time. "You ruined everything. And then, without looking back, I turned and left, leaving behind not only that restaurant, but the life I knew. Every step I took was like a hammer breaking the years we spent together. Every beat of my heart was a choked scream, a part of me dying there. But the worst of all wasn't the betrayal itself. It wasn't the kiss. It wasn't the humiliation. The worst of all came later. When I discovered that this story didn't end there. When I realized that a traitor's downfall never comes the way we imagine. Because if there's something that destiny makes a point of teaching, it's that no one cheats without consequences. And theirs was just beginning. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal will never be romanticized or justified. All the stories are fictional, but they show the harsh reality of how infidelity destroys lives, erodes trust and leaves marks that will never be erased. Get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a lesson in loyalty, consequences, and the true face of betrayal. Take a deep breath. The shocking story begins now. The clock said 6:37 p.m. when Ethan parked the car in the garage at home. The day had been exhausting, but a pleasant tiredness took over his body. He liked the feeling of duty accomplished, of knowing that his effort at work brought stability to his family. He took off his jacket and ran his hand through his hair, trying to dissipate the tension that had accumulated throughout the day. He took a deep breath before entering, as he did whenever he crossed that door, where the world outside ceased to exist, and only he and Emily mattered. The aroma of freshly prepared dinner filled the air, a mixture of garlic, herbs and something slightly citrusy. Emily always liked cooking, and he appreciated that part of the routine. The low sound of instrumental music echoed from the dining room, making the atmosphere even more welcoming. She had her back to him, stirring something in the pan, her hair tied up in a messy way, a loose shirt falling around her shoulders and a subtle smile when she noticed his presence. He watched her for a moment, admiring the little details that made him love her so much. The way she bit her lip when she concentrated, the way her eyes lit up when she saw him, as if, even after so many years together, there was still that spark of newness. She turned around, drying her hands on the tea towel before moving in for a quick kiss. That was a custom between them, a simple gesture, but one that carried all the meaning of complicity that they had built over the years. "Dinner is almost ready, I had a quiet day today." "And you?" he asked, as he returned to the stove. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her. "Endless meetings, but nothing you're not used to. I just wanted a quiet night now." He sighed and opened the top button on his shirt, finally feeling at home. The two had dinner together, exchanging stories of the day, talking about plans for the weekend, laughing about small everyday situations. The conversation flowed naturally, as it always did. Their marriage was solid, built on years of friendship before love. They met in college, in one of those chance encounters that seemed destined to happen. He focused on his studies, wanting to guarantee a stable future. She is a dreamer, driven by her passion for art, with an always attentive look at the world around her. They were different, but they complemented each other in a way that made sense. Over the years, they have faced challenges, crises, moments of doubt. But there was never any hesitation about the sentiment they shared. They were partners, accomplices, best friends before anything else. Ethan had always admired Emily's strength, the way she saw beauty in the little things. Emily, in turn, felt safe with him, knew she could count on his unconditional support. Together they built a life that seemed stable, unshakable. In recent months, however, small changes have begun to emerge. Nothing blatant, nothing that would make Ethan immediately suspicious, but details that were quietly accumulating. Emily started getting ready for work more, something that didn't seem like a concern to her before. She started leaving earlier, getting distracted by her cell phone, being present without really being there. Ethan understood, but he attributed it to routine, to the natural tiredness of everyday life. He himself was always so involved in the work that he hardly questioned the subtle changes. After all, after so many years together, some phases came and went. It was normal. Emily's work at the company required some travel, dinners with colleagues and corporate events. Ethan always supported her, he was never a jealous man, he trusted her. I found his independence and the way he stood out in a professional environment admirable. He himself was dedicated to what he did, a respected executive, but he never wanted it to interfere with his marriage. I was proud of the balanced relationship they had, where each person had their space without suffocating the other. The company dinner was scheduled for that night. An event that took place annually, bringing together employees to celebrate the year's results. Ethan had already attended on other occasions, but that night, something inside him made him feel restless. Maybe it was just the accumulated tiredness or the strange feeling that he had been carrying for some time without knowing exactly why. Emily, however, seemed excited, chose a new dress, put on a different perfume than usual. "You look beautiful," he said, and she smiled, fixing her hair in front of the mirror. On the way to the restaurant, they chatted about small things. He was driving, and she was checking messages on her cell phone, laughing discreetly at something she read. He gave her a curious look, but didn't ask anything. I trusted her. Always trusted. The restaurant's hall was elegantly decorated, yellowish lights, soft ambient music, waiters circulating with wine glasses and trays of appetizers. The atmosphere was relaxed, laughter echoed in the corners, co-workers greeted each other with handshakes and friendly hugs. Emily quickly mingled with the group, greeting a few people while Ethan got drinks from the bar. He observed her from afar, the way she interacted with her colleagues, the lightness in her gestures. She always had an ease in dealing with people, something he admired. He returned with the wine glasses and handed one to her. They talked to some employees and toasted the company's success. Everything seemed normal. Until something changed. Small details began to catch Ethan's attention. The way Emily exchanged glances with someone across the room, a discreet smile, a different sparkle in her eyes. Her boss approached, greeted them both cordially, but there was something in the way he looked at Emily that made an uneasiness rise in Ethan's chest. He tried to push away the thoughts, he believed he was imagining things. But that feeling didn't leave him. Time passed, and Ethan felt something was out of place. The conversation between Emily and the boss seemed natural, but there were nuances, gestures, a subtle way of positioning themselves close to each other. He squeezed the glass in his hand, trying to shake off the paranoia that arose in his mind. But then, in an instant, amid the hubbub of dinner, everything fell apart. The exact moment Ethan's eyes caught the scene was like a punch to the gut. A kiss. Fast, but enough to break everything. Enough to make the world spin around you. His body stiffened, his heart raced, and a deafening silence took over his mind. What he did next would define everything. But in that split second, between disbelief and fury, he knew. Nothing would be like before. The company dinner continued like any other successful corporate event. Laughter echoed through the room, toasts were raised and the soft lights reflected off wine glasses and discreet glances. Ethan moved around the room, exchanging polite words with some colleagues, but his attention was never fully present. His mind oscillated between the uncomfortable signs he had picked up since they arrived and trying to convince himself that it was all just paranoia. Emily was nearby, laughing at something her boss said, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a casual gesture, but one that made his stomach turn. The minutes dragged by. He tried to ignore the growing feeling that something was wrong. Her every laugh, every exchange of glances, every little detail seemed to increase the discomfort that throbbed in her mind. I didn't want to be that kind of man. Jealous, paranoid, suspicious for no reason. He always believed that trust was the cornerstone of a solid relationship, and there was never any real reason to question Emily. But now, something in him refused to ignore the discomfort. The surrounding conversations seemed to become distant noises as his eyes remained attentive to her every movement. The boss gestured excitedly, and Emily tilted her head slightly to hear better, her eyes shining with interest. Ethan tried to look away, sipped his wine, tried to focus on anything else. But he couldn't. Something was pulling him back to that scene, to those details that, until recently, he would have considered irrelevant. But now they seemed glaring. Time seemed to slow down. Emily looked at her boss for a moment, a quick look, but filled with something Ethan couldn't name. And then, before I could even process what I was seeing, it happened. The boss leaned towards her and their lips touched. Fast. Subtle. As if it were a rehearsed gesture, something that had already happened before. But in that brief instant, everything fell apart. Ethan's blood ran cold. His heart hammered in his chest, and for a moment he felt like the ground had disappeared from beneath his feet. The restaurant, once so full of life, seemed to become a distant, stuffy scene, as if he were observing everything through a glass. The air became heavy. Heat rose to his face. The silence inside him lasted for fractions of a second before reality hit him like a violent blow. His breathing became ragged, the muscles in his body tensed. He blinked, as if trying to erase the scene from his memory, as if what he had just seen could be a misinterpretation. But it wasn't. The truth was there, naked, raw and cruel before his eyes. Emily walked away quickly, her eyes wide, as if she only realized at that moment that someone was watching. The boss adjusted his posture, cleared his throat and disguised it, as if nothing had happened, as if that kiss was something insignificant. But it wasn't. For Ethan, it wasn't. The world around kept spinning. The conversations, the clinking glasses, the occasional laughter from guests who had no idea what had just happened. But for him, nothing else existed but the suffocating lump in his throat and the bitter taste of betrayal eating away at every cell in his body. Emily hesitated, as if deciding what to say, but any words that came out of her mouth at that moment would be useless. Nothing would change what had happened. Nothing would undo the fact that she had allowed it. That gesture was not just a slip, but a reflection of something much bigger. Of something that had been happening for much longer than he could even imagine. Ethan clenched his fists. The air inside his lungs felt insufficient. I didn't know if what I felt was anger, pain, indignation or all at the same time, mixed in a whirlwind that threatened to explode. What kind of nonsense is going on here? His voice cut through the air like a sharp blade, causing a few heads to turn in his direction. Emily's eyes widened even more, her breathing shaky. The boss straightened his posture, still trying to maintain his composure, but there was a trace of discomfort in his gaze. The entire hall fell silent. It was as if time had stopped, as if every person there was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Ethan didn't look away. It didn't blink. He felt his heart beating with absurd intensity, but it didn't weaken. Now everyone will know who you really are. I'll get a divorce, and your mask will fall. The tension in the air was palpable. The silence seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Emily's gaze was fixed on him, as if she were searching for something, some way to repair what had just been destroyed. But there was no way. There was no justification that could be given. The boss, on the other hand, just looked around, as if trying to gauge the severity of the situation. As if trying to find a way out before everything became irreversible. But it's gone. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. Nothing would be like before. The trust, the love, the years they had built together, everything now seemed like a farce. Betrayal was not just an act. It was the destruction of everything he believed in. And he knew, at that moment, that this was just the beginning. The worst was yet to come. Ethan left the restaurant with long strides, his chest inflating and deflating irregularly, his breathing heavy and his thoughts racing over each other. The cold night cut into his face, but the boiling heat of betrayal stung much more than any icy wind. He opened the car door with force, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. His eyes were fixed ahead, but his mind was far away. The images replayed in his head like an endless movie. The kiss. Her look. The way the boss acted as if none of that mattered. As if he were some idiot, someone irrelevant. Everything was falling apart inside him. Emily appeared soon after, hurrying out, her heels echoing through the parking lot. Her face carried an expression of panic. She opened the passenger door, hesitantly, but got in. The silence between them was crushing. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. The air inside the car seemed rarefied, filled with tension, with words that needed to be said, but neither of them knew how to start. Emily took a deep breath, her voice trembling, low, but filled with despair. "I can explain," he let out a short, bitter laugh, his head slowly turning to face her. "Explain?" The tone of his voice was cutting. "Explain what?" "How you betrayed me under my nose. How you allowed him to touch you as if I didn't exist." Her gaze wavered, her hands clasped in her lap as if she were trying to find a way to contain her own nervousness. "It wasn't like that, Ethan. It's not what you think." He laughed again, an incredulous laugh, filled with pain and fury. "You kissed your boss, Emily. I saw it. Everyone saw it. So explain to me, how exactly am I supposed to interpret that?" She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears, but he didn't want to see her cry. Not now. Not after all. He wanted answers, he wanted the truth, he wanted to understand how everything had gotten there. "I didn't want it to be like this." She looked at her hands, avoiding looking at him, as if she were trying to organize her own thoughts before speaking. "I swear I tried to end it. But things got complicated. I didn't know how to get out." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Complicated?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and contempt. "Complicated how? Did you think you could go through with this without me finding out? That he was more important than our marriage?" She finally looked up at him, and what Ethan saw there made him even more uneasy. It wasn't just guilt. There was fear. A deep, rooted fear. "It's not about that," her voice was low, almost a whisper. "It's not just about the two of us." Something about the way she said it sent a shiver down his spine. He leaned his body forward, his gaze sharp, his breathing heavy. "So tell me. Now, Emily. What the hell is going on?" The silence that followed was deafening. Emily hesitated, as if she were choosing her words, as if she knew that anything said in that moment would change everything. "He's got me in his hands, Ethan." Her voice finally came out, carrying a weight he didn't understand. He frowned. "What do you mean by that?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her courage was necessary. "He knows something about me. Something that could destroy everything." His blood ran cold. "What?" The word came out slow, drawn out, loaded with tension. "What does he know?" She took a deep breath. "Remember the money I received from the company a few months ago? That bonus I said was an incentive?" He nodded slowly, his stomach churning. "It wasn't a bonus." She closed her eyes for a moment. "I took money from him, Ethan. To cover a debt. A debt I never told you I had." Ethan's chest rose and fell, anger mixing with confusion. "What debt, Emily?" She bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears again. "I lost money. A lot of money. I got into an investment that looked promising, but it was a scam. I got into debt. I tried to sort it out on my own, but things only got worse. And then, he showed up. He said he could help me. But that help came with a price." Ethan felt like his world was breaking into pieces. "He bought you." His voice came out as a harsh whisper, filled with disgust. She shook her head quickly. "No. I never wanted that, Ethan. But he used this situation against me. He said that if I didn't accept it, he could make my resignation look like an embezzlement. He has influence, he has connections. I was stuck. I tried to avoid it, but every time I said no, he put more pressure on me. Ethan felt his heart pounding in his chest. He ran his hands over his face, trying to absorb what he was hearing. "Why didn't you tell me?" she sobbed. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that you would hate me for being so stupid, for falling for this scam, for keeping this from you." He closed his eyes, feeling the anger bubbling inside him, but also feeling a crushing weight of disappointment. "So, what happened today? Did you give in?" The question came out sharp, cutting. She shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I tried to push him away, but he reminded me of what was at stake. He knew you were there, Ethan. He did it on purpose. He wanted you to see. He wanted to destroy everything." The air became thick. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenched. Now everything made sense. The proximity. The boss's look. The way he acted naturally after the kiss. It was a move. A cruel game, and Emily had been a pawn in it. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to organize his own feelings. There was anger, pain, frustration, but most of all, there was the realization that the man he had always respected at work was not just a traitor, but a manipulator. And Emily, despite everything, had been a pawn. But there was something he still didn't understand. "What now, Emily? What else does he have against you?" She looked at him, her eyes red, her expression tired. "He won't stop, Ethan. He's held me hostage to this debt. He wants to keep going. And if I refuse?" She hesitated, swallowing hard. "He said he could ruin not only my career, but yours as well." The weight of those words fell on him like a punch. It wasn't just an emotional betrayal. It was something much bigger. And Ethan knew it wouldn't end there. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Everything now seemed like a meticulously woven net to keep him trapped, suffocated by the lies and manipulations. He looked away from Emily for a moment, trying to process the extent of the disaster they had gotten themselves into. The silence between them was heavy, tense, as if every second carried more layers of painful truths that he didn't know if he was ready to hear. "So he has you in his hands." His voice was low, but carried with a tone that mixed incredulity and something close to contempt. "And you didn't tell me anything. You left me living this lie while he used you as a pawn in this dirty game." Emily bit her lower lip, her eyes pleading, but she knew that any words now would be insufficient. "I tried to protect you." Her voice was a thread, a shaky whisper that only added to Ethan's frustration. He closed his eyes, trying to contain the urge to scream. "Protect me? Emily, do you realize what you just said? You didn't protect me from anything. You threw me into this hell without me even knowing." He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, making Emily wince. "You made me look like an idiot this whole time. I slept next to a woman who was being blackmailed and manipulated by her own boss, and I didn't even suspect." She closed her eyes for a moment, her lips trembling. "I didn't want you to know like that." Ethan let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Oh, and how exactly were you planning to tell me? Between one breakfast and another? Or maybe after another one of those events where you tried your best to pretend nothing was happening?" Her silence was as big a confession as any words. He couldn't stay there any longer. The air inside the car felt thick, suffocating. He opened the door and got out, walking a few steps across the almost empty parking lot. He needed to breathe, he needed to get away from her before she said something that couldn't be taken back later. But Emily didn't let him go. She got out of the car and ran to him, holding his arm. "Ethan, listen to me. I know I screwed up, I know I lied. But if you want me to leave, I will. Just tell me what to do." He looked at it, and there it was. The same woman he had built a life with, but now a complete stranger. "You want me to tell you what to do? I wish you would have told me from the beginning." I wish you would have trusted me enough to not let things get this far. His voice was firm, but there was a vulnerability hidden there, a last vestige of the man who still wanted to understand how everything had gotten so out of control. Emily hung her head, tears falling silently. I didn't want to lose you. The sentence hung in the air, filled with an almost childish desperation. Ethan felt a pang in his chest, but he wouldn't budge. Not now. You've already lost me, Emily. You just haven't realized it yet. She took a step back, as if his words had hit her body with physical force. This can't be the end, Ethan. But he didn't respond. His silence was a much bigger response than anything else. He took a deep breath, pulling his cell phone out of his pocket. This ends now. And then he dialed. The clock on the wall said 11:45 p.m. when Ethan parked in front of the company building. The lights in Emily's boss's office were still on, casting an artificial glow against the dark glass. It was expected. Men like him never slept, never rested. They always planned their next moves, they always predicted every move before it could be made. But Ethan wasn't a pawn in his game. No more. Emily stayed in the car, clutching her coat to her body, nervous, not knowing what would happen from now on. He left and crossed the hall, ignoring the security guard at the reception, who only looked up at him hesitantly, but didn't dare stop him. He knocked hard on the door. Once, twice, 3 times. Until it opened. The boss was there, his surprised expression quickly replaced by a smug smile. Ethan, what can I do for you at this hour? He leaned against the doorframe, as if that encounter was just another irrelevant detail of the night. Ethan crossed the room in a second, stopping inches away from him. You destroyed my marriage. His voice was low, but carried a dangerous weight. The boss tilted his head slightly to the side, the same confident smile still present. I didn't destroy anything, Ethan. You're exaggerating. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor there. Ah, so that's it. Now you're going to pretend that what happened was insignificant. He clenched his fists. I know about the money. I know about the blackmail. I know about everything. The chief's expression didn't waver, but his eyes flashed with something close to irritation. And what exactly do you plan to do with this information? Ethan took a step even closer, the words coming out sharp. I plan to destroy you. The boss laughed, but this time there was something forced, an attempt to maintain the pose. That's ridiculous. You have nothing on me. But Ethan smiled, a cold, calculated smile. Maybe I don't have proof yet. But you know what I have. A respected name, an impeccable reputation. And you know what you have. A list of shady deals and a history of manipulation that I don't need to try very hard to expose. The boss's smile began to fade. You don't want to pick a fight, Ethan. But he had already bought it. Oh, I will. Ethan blinked slowly, the anger that had been consuming him now channeled into something much more lethal. Because now I have nothing left to lose. The boss clenched his jaw, his gaze finally carrying something that looked like fear. He knew that Ethan was not a man of empty words. The silence between them was intense, a duel of looks where, for the first time, the man in front of him realized he could lose. Ethan wouldn't back down. And that was just the first play of the game he was about to turn around. The silence that fell in the office was heavy, filled with suffocating tension. Ethan didn't look away, he didn't blink. The boss took a deep breath, the air of superiority beginning to crumble under the weight of the silent threat that hung between them. He always thought he had control over everything, that no one would dare stand up to him. But now he was facing someone who had nothing left to lose, and that made Ethan dangerous. The boss took a step back, as if he wanted to create a distance that would protect him from the avalanche that was about to collapse on him. You don't know who you're dealing with, his voice was lower, but carried with a failed attempt at intimidation. Ethan tilted his head slightly to the side, a cold, humorless smile appearing on his lips. Not you either. The boss licked his lips, looking away for a moment, a clear sign that his confidence was fracturing. What do you want, Ethan? What's your goal with this? The question was filled with caution, as if he were trying to gauge the size of the real threat. Ethan took a deep breath, keeping his posture steady. I want you to disappear. I want you to resign from your position. I want you to disappear from Emily's life, and I want you to never even try to get close to anyone I know again. The boss laughed, but there was no real fun there. Do you really think you can make me do this? Ethan leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharp like a blade about to cut. I don't think so. I know. He stepped to the side, took his cell phone from his pocket and slid the screen, showing the recording of the conversation. Every word that had been said in the last few minutes was recorded. The boss paled, his once confident stance now filled with rigid discomfort. You recorded it. He muttered, as if trying to process the information. Ethan smiled, but it was a smile without any trace of mercy. This is just the beginning. I haven't gone to the press yet, I haven't sent anything to the company board yet, I haven't yet made your dirty blackmail public. But I can do it in a matter of seconds. The boss remained silent, his eyes fixed on his cell phone screen as if he were facing his own death sentence. Ethan seized the moment. You have two options. The first, you resign immediately, disappear from the company and disappear from our lives. The second, I destroy everything you've built, and I guarantee that every single one of your dirt comes to light. Choose wisely. The boss ran his hands over his face, his mind clearly in turmoil. He knew he was cornered. He never imagined that the situation would get out of his control so quickly. For a moment, his gaze met Ethan's, and there was a silent understanding. He had no way out. He let out a long sigh, his shoulders falling in resignation. Okay. I resign. Ethan just nodded. He took no pleasure in that victory. It wasn't satisfaction, it was just justice. Without another word, he turned and left the office, leaving his boss to deal with his own ruin. The cold night air felt lighter as he left the building. But the storm inside him was still far from dissipating. Emily was still in the car, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes red from crying. When Ethan opened the door and walked in, she held her breath, as if preparing to hear his sentence. He didn't say anything immediately, just started the car and started driving. The silence was tense, almost unbearable. Emily swallowed hard before finding the courage to speak. What happened in there? Ethan kept his eyes on the road. He resigned. The answer was short, direct, without any emotion. Emily let out a breath she didn't even realize she was holding, but the relief didn't last long. What about us? Her question hung in the air, and Ethan felt its impact on his chest. He gripped the steering wheel, feeling the muscles in his shoulders tense again. There is no us anymore, Emily. Her breathing hitched, and the tears began to flow again. Ethan, please. But he shook his head. Don't do that. Don't try to fix something you destroyed. You made your choices, and now you need to accept the consequences. The car turned onto a familiar street. Ethan stopped in front of their house, but made no move to leave. Emily looked at him, her eyes desperate. Aren't you going in? He finally turned his face to look at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her chest hurt even more. There was no more explosive anger. There was no more shouting or accusations. What remained was something much worse. Indifference. I've already made my decision. I can't go through with this. His voice was lower now, carrying an undeniable weight. Trust is gone. And without trust, what's left? Emily sobbed, covering her face with her hands. He felt nothing but an overwhelming emptiness. Maybe, in another moment, in another time, he would have been able to forgive her. But now, after everything, after the lies, the betrayal, the omissions, there was nothing left to save. He opened the car door and got out. The cold wind hit his face as he walked down the sidewalk, not looking back. Emily stayed inside the car, watching it disappear into the darkness. The house that had once been their home now seemed like a strange place. An empty space, without soul, without life. He knew that once he walked through that door, he would never be the same. And for the first time in a long time, he accepted that. He accepted that it was time to move on. Ethan entered the house feeling the weight of silence spread throughout the rooms. It was strange. Every corner of that place held memories, moments shared, promises made and now broken. The air seemed dense, filled with something he couldn't explain, a remnant of everything that had been and now no longer existed. He looked around and realized that that space was no longer his. Everything there was a reminder of Emily, of the life they had built together that was now falling apart before her eyes. He walked slowly into the living room, throwing his keys on the coffee table, but didn't sit down. His eyes wandered to the picture frame on the bookshelf. The wedding photo, the first wedding anniversary, the trips they took. Memories frozen in time. Emily's face smiling beside him, the expression of happiness he always believed to be true. Now it all seemed like a lie. He picked up one of the frames and stared at the picture for a moment before simply turning it face down. Fatigue began to weigh on his shoulders. It wasn't just physical, but emotional, a deep drain that made your head pound. He didn't want to sleep there. I didn't want to spend another night under that roof knowing that Emily would walk through the door at any moment. The idea of breathing the same air as her now seemed unbearable. He took out his cell phone and dialed the number of a hotel. He booked a room without even thinking much about it. I didn't need luxury, I just needed distance. He went up to his room, grabbed a suitcase and started throwing some clothes into it. The simple act of packing luggage brought a strange feeling of completion. As if that were the final step, the definitive closure of something he already knew had no return. Just as he was about to go downstairs, he heard the front door open. Emily walked in, her eyes puffy, her lips trembling. She hesitated when she saw him standing there, holding the suitcase. The shock was immediate. "Are you going out?" Her voice sounded weak, as if she already knew the answer but was still expecting something different. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes." Emily approached slowly, her eyes searching his, desperate for something that could hold her there. "Can't we talk? Can't we try?" Ethan's gaze no longer held anger, nor pain, just an overwhelming exhaustion. "Talk about what, Emily? Do you want me to pretend nothing happened? That the trust that was destroyed can be rebuilt overnight?" She bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. "I made mistakes, Ethan. I lied, I hid things from you, but I never wanted it to end like this." He laughed, a humorless laugh, without any trace of emotion. "You never wanted us to end up like this, but at the same time, you made all the decisions that brought us to exactly this moment." She took a step forward, as if she could reach something in him that still remained. "Please don't go like this. Tell me what I can do." He looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tense. "What can you do?" The question came out as a whisper filled with irony. "If you knew the answer to that, Emily, maybe we wouldn't be here right now." She started to cry. Not loud sobs, not theatrical drama, but the silent, devastating cry of someone who knows they are losing something they can never get back. Ethan sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. He didn't want to prolong it any longer. "I didn't want to hold on to the suffering, the guilt, the feeling that maybe it could be different." He already knew the truth. "I had already accepted. I have already booked a hotel." His voice was low but firm. "I don't know for how long, but I can't stay here. I need space." Emily nodded slowly, even though she knew there was nothing she could do to stop him from leaving. Ethan walked past her without saying anything else, opened the door and walked out, feeling the cold night air fill his lungs. The sound of the door closing behind him was definitive. It was the end. At the hotel, he threw his suitcase on the bed and sat in the armchair next to the window. The city was still alive, lights flashing on the buildings, cars crossing the streets. But he felt like he was in another world, a space suspended between the past and an uncertain future. He took out his cell phone and, without thinking, opened the photo gallery. He saw images of trips, of dinners, of happy moments with Emily. He pursed his lips before simply locking the screen and throwing the device on the table next to him. There was no point in reliving it. He needed to look ahead. But where? The future now seemed like a void, an unknown road that he didn't know where it began. For years, he believed his life was mapped out with Emily. Now, he no longer knew who he was without her. And that scared him. But he knew one thing, he would not go back. He would not be that man who forgave the unforgivable. He wouldn't ignore the signs, he wouldn't accept empty excuses. He deserved more. And this time, he would guarantee that he would find that something more. Even if I needed to build everything from scratch. Time passed like a blur after that night. Ethan didn't come home. He stayed at the hotel for a few weeks until he found an apartment where he could start over. Every day was a battle between trying to forget and accepting that he would never be able to completely erase everything he had experienced. But he was determined. Emily was his past, and he wouldn't let the past destroy him. The divorce was made official faster than he expected. There were no long disputes, no desperate attempts to mend something that was already broken. Emily signed the papers without question. There was nothing more to be said. The silence between them was the only thing that remained. Emily tried to move on, but the shadow of what she had done haunted her. People commented. The company dinner, the betrayal exposed, the boss being forced to resign, everything became a silent scandal that circulated in the office corridors. She continued working there, but she was no longer the same. The atmosphere became cold, the looks filled with judgment. Where she was once respected, now she was just a living reminder of everything that had gone wrong. She tried to ignore it, to pretend she didn't care, but each day was a reminder of what she had lost. From the man she loved and who wouldn't return. The respect I could never recover. Of the mistake that cost you your happiness. The boss, in turn, was not so lucky. Ethan's recording did not need to be used. He knew that if he tried to fight, the situation would get even worse for him. So he accepted his ruin in silence, but that didn't save him. Investors learned of the blackmail, financial irregularities began to come to light, and his name was irreparably tarnished. The corporate market closed its doors to him. The reputation he took years to build was destroyed in a matter of weeks. No company wanted to be associated with a man who manipulated his employees and blackmailed people to maintain his power. He lost everything. The money, the contacts, the position. He disappeared from public life, reduced to nothing more than a walking failure. Ethan, on the other hand, found what he never imagined existed after betrayal, freedom. At first, it was difficult. He felt alone, as if he had lost a piece of himself. But little by little, he began to realize that he had never been as strong as he was now. He rebuilt his life from scratch, without having to carry the pain like a burden. You met new people, allowed yourself to live without fear of the next disappointment. And eventually he found someone who actually saw him. Someone who didn't hide secrets, who didn't make empty promises. Someone who was there for him because of who he was, not what he could offer. He went slowly, without rushing, but when he realized, there was no more room for shadows of the past. Only for a future that finally felt like yours. Fate was merciless to those who played with trust and loyalty. Emily never found her way back to the life she had. Her mistake haunted her in every new relationship, in every attempt to start over. The boss disappeared from high society, a forgotten name, a story that no one wanted to remember. But Ethan? He survived. He stood up. And in the end, he won. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Put yourself in Ethan's shoes, would you forgive or move on? Leave your comment, your opinion is important. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Remember, betrayal never leads to anything but destruction. Until next time.